seeing this way, if we don't approach this without a structural framework, so to speak, we need to be able to catch ourselves from essentially falling. I feel like when we're dealing with coping mechanisms, what can often take place is if we move forward too quickly or without this sort of foundation, we'll find another one that can actually be even more insidious than the one that was already in place. Because now you're like, well, I found this new thing. and moving forward, retracting from that can be even more difficult.
Yeah, because one of the things that we're dealing with basically is the things that bring us the most discomfort. This is the trauma. This is the things that we've avoided. And so let's look at how these things are formed, in regards to authenticity and risk, just in general, the feeling of discomfort, the way our school systems are structured, how we're taught to behave, how we're socialized, like you were talking about, socialized behavior, how we're taught to behave in the system of our society is to regurgitate information correctly, basically. And anything that is more of like an original or expressive or dynamic or unpredictable way of behaving is perceived in a negative light. But there's also a social hierarchy that's established where if you succeed at something, the other children resent you because there's a literal numerical grading system that assigns value, right? And so if you're more valuable than the other children, they're going to posture themselves socially to get that value back, And so it creates a lot of competition and a fear-based response to making a mistake and succeeding.
Right. Yes.
It's pretty crazy.
Fear of failure and fear of success.
Right. Which normalizes mediocrity and it numbs emotion. It creates this very specific protocol for behaving that incapacitates a person's ability to sit with, to move through risk, basically. And so they default back into comfort zone. So looking at trauma, one of the reasons why structure is so important is that it gives safety. And any type of spiritual work, any type of trauma work, any type of personal development work really roots itself and becomes permanently established in relationship. It doesn't permanently root itself in isolation. It has to be brought into some form of relationship, actually be activated and grounded and rooted in the system. And one of the reasons why structure is important is it creates safety and it creates connection. As a person is exploring things that are incredibly dangerous in the nervous system, because we have evidence from the past that doing this is going to result in pain, that is going to result in rejection, in some sort of devaluing of who we are, danger at the most fundamental level. So we need to know that we are actually in contact with something, with someone that cares about us, that will guide us, that will support us as we go through this threatening experience.
Yes.
So anything that is new, anything that's novel, anything that carries a degree of risk to it requires some sort of tangible sense of safety. And in regards to trauma, specifically, trauma is healed through contact. The result of trauma is always some form of disconnection that is seeking connection once again. So it's essential in any type of trauma work. Like if somebody is going through a trauma release, to be present with them, to be fully in contact in whatever way is appropriate, not necessarily physical contact. It can just be emotional. It can be verbal. It can just be your physical presence there. Mm-hmm. There has to be some sort of appropriate contact for that trauma to be moved through in a healthy way and for that contact to be reestablished. In regards to overcoming programs and developing the ability to move through discomfort is It's like going from ECS to grade 1 to grade 2 to grade 3 to grade 4. There's a progressive building of that capacity where at first the feeling of discomfort is so intense that a person just wants to withdraw back into safety, right? And what is it that actually guides a person into and through that discomfort that has stopped them from doing that so many times before? It's some sort of catalyst. It's either like supportive, loving contact. It's the safety of a structure. It's some sort of inspiring vision of hope. There has to be some sort of catalyst that is more powerful than the resistance and the discomfort that has prevented that movement. After they've completed that movement through the discomfort, like one of my clients has recently had this big breakthrough where he feared he's an amazing dancer, amazing technical dancer, but he has carried this intense fear of judgment and rejection that has prevented him from going to a dance class and B, any type of dance community for over a decade, for almost 15 years. So he like longs to connect to other people who are dancing, but he's terrified of what they're going to think of him. And it's literally stopped him from engaging in that community for 15 years. And through this program, he was able to finally take a few steps in that direction. He went and danced out in public for the first time in over 10 years. He went to his first dance class for the first time in over 15. And after having that experience of actually moving through it, from the catalyst of safety and support, now that can be integrated so that the experience of resistance or discomfort or fear, however it shows up in the nervous system, is now associated with the result of moving through it. And as soon as that is connected, the fear response, the resistance response is no longer an inhibition. It's actually like, oh, okay, I recognize this. This is a growing opportunity. I know what's on the other side of this on a somatic level and how pleasurable it is to actually move through that. It's the same as in a yoga class. After you do like 60 minutes or 90 minutes of yoga, you lie down in Shavasana and you feel the benefits of your practice. And it's the most important posture in all of yoga because you are rooting the benefits of the practice so that your system associates it with the practice itself. So no longer do you like resist going to yoga because you're like, I don't want to feel that painful stretching sensation. You're like, oh man, I want to go to yoga because I want that relief sensation. It's the same thing with resistance. It's the same thing with fear. As soon as you taste what's on the other side of it, then you can start establishing that connection and that becomes a pull driver. It brings you towards those experiences instead of the fear, the absence, the disconnection being the push driver, that is forcing you into a scenario due to the pain that you're feeling. It's a completely different way of existing. And you want that to be the program. You want risk to actually be associated with something that brings value to you, even failure. Trying something and not succeeding, but having the capacity to extract all of the lessons that you took from that and then to integrate them and to apply them in some sort of action step. You want that to be the program because then anything that is causing you inhibition in your life, anything that is a traumatic program, anything that is unhealthy will inevitably surface and you have everything that you need to move through that, especially if you have a structure, a community, a support system, a toolkit. You're fully equipped to actually meet life and collaborate with it in this evolutionary cycle that you were speaking to. You can't stay static in life. You can't just have your children and then, okay, they're 1 and 3 forever and you figure out how to deal with a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old and then you're set. They continue growing and eventually maybe they have children. And there's this constant adaptation that is required of us as we move through life. And by trying to retreat back into safety zones, we're actually moving against the natural inertia of life that desires our evolution, that desires the full realization of what it is that we're contributing to life in every single moment. But in order to be able to do that, we have to develop a familiarity with newness, a familiarity with moving through discomfort, by taking risks, by failing even. We have to become friends with these things, but that can't happen just on an intellectual level.
Absolutely.
It has to happen through your experience so that you have that to draw upon to motivate you to do it over and over and over again until that's just who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that most fears are derived from what we imagine them to be, whether we have witnessed this in somebody else's experience, just saying, well, I watched this happen to Sally. I don't want that to be my experience. So attaining just a fear out of that, and it lives, it grows in the mind. It can really, and and then it's even worse when it is actually a fear that was experienced in something that happened to us that we experienced. But what I also find is, especially when they're things rooted as children, we find the only way to cope with it. And as children, bless us, we are so imaginative, and we have so that we can really create a splinter, to be a dagger, to be a nail, and because we're, as children, we're sensitive, and we can really, if allowed, if not having that support system that can meet you on that level in that time of need, and this is regardless of any age or time, if there's not someone that's able to help you, guide you through this, it really does become this living beast in your mind. I think this is what we call it, facing the shadow, facing the the ego, the unconscious part, because it's almost like it has a stomach, and it if you so allow it, it will thrive on anything, any experience that can even be tied to our associations, which again has to do with language. I was talking about that earlier, how language and are you familiar with priming? Like, we prime, in psychology there's a theory that if we prime a certain word, certain words have different connotations to them. So through life we experience certain things that are attached to a word or or even a place it can be. And then all the things that were in this place or word, interaction, whatever the symbol is, like we think of a dog, we can think of many different breeds of dogs, right? We can also think of a person being a dog, or we can think of the way that these things branch out. So too do our experiences of fear, shame, pain, all those things. They can actually branch out in ways that we may not have even realized. And that's why we have these, I don't want to necessarily err on phobia. Now it can turn into phobia, but why we have these sort of irrational, and we're not even quite sure of situations and circumstances, why this thing is so, why am I all of a sudden so afraid to go at, your client, you're talking about how he enjoyed dancing and he was very good at it, right? Being afraid of performance, where was this developed? And, I'm assuming one has to practice through, if you're good, you're doing this on your own by yourself at some point or another. you're experiencing this in yourself. So what is it about setting and location and people? Is it where the fear came up? It could even be that it was, you take one certain person, that person could have been a mother figure, so it could be attached to women, and then all of a sudden there's a fear response to a woman who's in an authoritative role there that triggers this sort of the reaction that you're talking about, that biological, the animal in us, to, it's like a fight or flight response that we actively engage upon, and we freeze, you know, feel like we don't.
Yeah, we have to be curious about ourselves, you know, entertain the idea that maybe we don't understand why we are behaving the way that we're behaving. Just to consider that as a possibility, and then to start looking at things like our reactions, our behaviors, the feedback that we get from other people, and start analyzing it. Again, not just from an intellectual place, but combining your feeling, thought, awareness. You know, we're asking the questions like you were just asking. You know, what is it about this scenario that I'm scared of? Oh, it's people. Okay, let's go back. When was the first time that I started like not dancing in front of people? When did that root itself? It's like, okay, well, I was comfortable dancing with people when I was in grade 7 and I wasn't in grade 10. So it happened sometime between then. You know, there's some sort of wound that is coming from like between 8 and 9, grade 8 and 9. And that is helpful only to the degree that we can start locating the core of the feeling. Like just the analysis of it is pretty useless because it doesn't have any practical application. It's not going to help us resolve the trauma. But what we can start doing, like one of the beautiful things about removing identity from emotion and from thought, and by rooting it in your sense of consciousness, is that there are 4 different components of consciousness that you can actively use. And one is thought. Second is image. Third is emotion or feeling. And the 4th is body sensation. These are all things that you can sense and things that you can actually activate with your consciousness. So if you go back and you're like, okay, the wound that is causing this coping mechanism or this behavior response was installed sometime around grade 7, grade 8, or grade 9, I could like use my mind to actually draw up images of when I was wounded in grade 7, grade 8, and grade 9, and then feel into which ones elicit the strongest emotional response, the strongest somatic response. So I'm actually investigating using my consciousness. So I like immerse myself in the experience of being in grade 7 at a talent show on stage and completely fucking up, you know, and having like being locked in that fight or flight state. I'll like activate that memory. And then as soon as it's activated, I can sense into my emotions and into my somatic experience. And it's like, this is what I feel when I dance in front of other people. That was the moment. That's the experience. And I used the power of my consciousness to activate that unprocessed experience. And then I can start engaging in trauma release processes with that experience that is actually alive in real time in my psychosomatic system. And that is how we process it. Because in the subconscious mind, in the body, there is no such thing as linear time. Everything is existing right now in the moment. And so that memory that is locked into the system doesn't exist in grade 7 and grade 8. It exists right now. And that's what we used our power of consciousness to activate. It's like you're drawing on this like slideshow to activate what's already present in the system, and then you can work with it. So that's the investigation. It's like, why do I have this feeling? What is causing it? It's people. Okay, people. When did I start feeling uncomfortable with people? It's like started right around grade 7. Okay, let's start exploring grade 7. And then you go into it like a scientist, but you use your feeling sense as the scientist. And then you pull out your tools after you find something workable to actually discharge that accumulated energy that hasn't been resolved. So these are some of the tools and the techniques that we have access to as human beings, which is amazing, that we can consciously heal trauma in ourselves that has been carried for years. And you don't even need to have an awareness of where it came from. As soon as it's activated in the system, you can start working with it. Like an example is me driving in the car with my partner. This happened a couple times where she was giving me instructions to get somewhere that I didn't need because I knew where to go. And so her giving me instructions started irritating me. And then it built into like anger that had the thought of it like, I'm not fucking stupid. I know where I'm going, but it was like this anger response. And it was like, it happened enough times where I was like irritable, and it like built into anger this one time where I was like, okay, this obviously isn't about what's happening in the moment. It's not about her giving me instruction. It's an unprocessed charge that's just being activated by her. I didn't need to know where it was coming from because the charge was already active, and that's the goal through like using image and memory and thought is as soon as you have the charge active in the system, that's the gold. That's all you need. You can process ancestral trauma like that. You can process trauma from your family like that. You don't need to know your family history to process, your grandma being raped. If something shows up in your system and you're in a fight or flight state and you have the tools necessary, you have the awareness of what's happening, you can go into a structured process to actually dilute that charge, to transmute the feeling, to heal that traumatic experience out of the system so that it's gone. Not that it's just like in the background again and you've suppressed it and you've covered it up with something, but that it is gone. It is discharged. And the fact that we can do that is phenomenal. And the fact is that most people are not using their consciousness like this because they are identified with their experiences. And then all of their energy goes towards trying to change or alter external circumstances so that they don't need to feel the things that are being elicited by those circumstances. That's the complete opposite of what our systems are designed to do, what our consciousness is capable of, and what actually propels us forward on our evolution as human beings. And that is what our society is right now. It's like this huge global network of victims who are all trying to like lash out at external systems to change them because they're dealing with a giant treasure chest of pain, and they're like, everything else needs to change. Our world is so fucked up, and if it doesn't fix, then I'm, just going to suffer forever. No. What you can do is you can start actually processing your emotional charge, your traumatic conditioning, and then that changes the way that you perceive and operate in the world on a small scale and on the largest scale possible. That is how transformation happens. It's not from changing external circumstance. It's about using the power of your consciousness as an incredibly evolved being to participate in your evolution. And then the very presence, the very patterns, programs that you have established in yourself as a conscious entity will start reforming your relationships, will start reforming the world. That is how we transform.
Absolutely. And I feel like once we actually come into this place of taking accountability and responsibility for our own transformation, it is so liberating, because when we finally come into new relationships or even approaching the ones that we already have, we understand where the other individual is at, and suddenly things are not so personal, things are not so, and in that there is so much liberation being, coming from, you get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It comes from this point where everything, not everything necessarily is personal, but most times we require that validation, the process that you were talking about, this social interactionism, where we start to develop the self based on, well, I came into this experience, and if from this experience I put on this mask so that the person I was interacting with would approve of this interaction. And based off of these many interactions throughout time, we'll just sort of develop this way I should move through the world. And we get to a certain point where we're like, well, why isn't this working? Or why did this go wrong? I mean, I've been doing this over and over, and every time I take this, and I won't be so fidgety, or I won't I'll wear more appropriate clothing when I show up for this sort of thing. And truly, once we come into this process of taking the accountability, we learn that it's not so serious. It's not so we're all kind of going through our own thing. And it's funny, it's not all about us. I feel like, at least personally, personal journey, I would approach situations and interactions and be like, I thought I had handled everything, and then it was a sideways glance, or kind of like and I'm like, oh gosh, did I say not speaking clear enough, or should I have done this way, or that way? And just taking it as it was like, well, I'm just wrong, or what I'm doing is not, and really embedding that into as part of my core,
Right. Totally. And instead, actually just recognizing that, oh, that's just a feeling reaction. And like we were talking about before, you're able to observe its qualities without identifying from it. The secret, though, is not suppressing it, not shutting it away or denying it, but actually welcoming it into the space and being like, oh, hey, how's it going there? And just hanging out with it for a second, acknowledging it, but recognizing that you are not that thing.
Exactly.
Because really how it shows up in relationship is if I am unwilling to feel embarrassed, and I have all of these behavior strategies for avoiding being embarrassed. And if I'm in a position where I'm embarrassed, I respond by trying to shrug it off, or maybe shut you down, or do something to be superior again. That is what creates these unhealthy relationship dynamics. But
Absolutely.
if I'm just embarrassed for a second, I'm like, oh fuck, I'm really feeling embarrassed right now. And then it's gone, that entire structure just dissolves completely. And what remains is an authentic way of relating, where it's like, oh man, that was really embarrassing. And I can just really feel it and then move forward with something else. And as long as we have these inhibitions around feeling certain things, we'll develop tactics and strategies to avoid them, which
Absolutely.
Then creates these relationship patterns that are coercive, that are manipulative, that are emotionally unavailable, or controlling, or dominating, or whatever. All of these things are just coping mechanisms for not wanting to feel something. But if you can comfortably feel miserable without identifying with it, but recognizing that feeling is present, then you're not going to do anything towards your partner or your friends as a way of manipulating a situation to avoid feeling miserable. If I did something that was inappropriate and I'm desperately avoiding the feeling of guilt, I'm going to disconnect somehow. I'm going to manipulate. I'm going to deny. I'm going to lie. I'm going to do something coercive to avoid the feeling of guilt. But if I'm able to actually just acknowledge that thing and hold myself accountable and be transparent, not just on an intellectual level, but feel the feeling of guilt, be like, oh, fuck, I did behave really poorly there, and feel that feeling, then not only will I not be manipulative, will I not lie about it, it will actually build trust and respect in my relationship, and I will immediately grow because I'll recognize, oh man, that behavior was out of integrity with my values. It had consequences on my relationship, and I know that because I can feel the immensity of this guilt, and also not identify with it. Be like, that doesn't mean I am of less value. I'm just a spiritual scientist. And I recognize that behavior
Yes.
has this consequence. And so I will not do that again, you know? And then it actually builds trust. It builds connection. It builds
Absolutely.
relationship because there's no avoidance tactics that are happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's a risky move for a lot of people because how we've established our self-worth, our status, is by, you know, presenting ourselves in a certain way. That's normal. And this is again why the safety and the structure and the support is necessary, because to take that risk, you know, of being guilty, to take that risk of feeling miserable without getting lost in an ocean of, you know, depression that you're never going to get out of, you know, to risk upsetting other people by being truthful, you know, it's a risky thing. And it's always worth it though, because what you reclaim through that is what everybody is looking for. It's the authenticity, it's the truth, it's the transparency. That is what creates connection. Vulnerability and honesty is what creates connection. You know, it's this whole idea that if we don't present ourselves in a certain way, we lose value. That is the lie. That is the conditioning. But it's a conditioning that's happened on a nervous system level that has to be addressed, you know, which is why there's like guidance and support and structure that's necessary before the new way of existing is actually rooted and established as a pattern.
I agree. I definitely agree with that. That was heavy. I feel like we covered like some major ground with sort of like the origin story. Sorry, I'm like taking a minute to like, you know, soak that all in.
Mm-hmm.
I think we covered some major ground. I'm trying to even think like, where do we go from there now? Because I really feel like that really just at the heart of it all we want is that connection. And it's so funny because like we, you know, through all of this unconscious programming that we've endured and been going through, and then having to, you know, really at the heart of it all, what I see as a poet and connecting through other poets on Instagram, and, you know, all we're really desiring is to have this open, heartfelt connection where we feel safe and loved, and where we can make mistakes and, you know, just be goofy and silly. And I think really like my aim is to, and I'm sure this is, you know, what you have been working on and building upon, is creating a community of people and hopefully just raising each other up, because I do truly believe when we work on ourselves and, you know, you take one person to have an honest and open interaction with one person has the ability to ripple out into, you know, growing through these things. The more we take accountability for ourselves, we're able to approach others, whether they're part of a program or not, even just planting that one little seed to help somebody, meet themselves and feel more comfortable in their own skin, so that maybe they one day start becoming more aware of these things that are hurting them. I think ultimately that is the goal. It's not even that it needs to be broadcasted throughout the world. I do believe that one person or just a small group of people can truly have that kind of impact that ripples out and, creates this in our communities. This is what we want to see. We want to see people successful and thriving. And I think oftentimes with, our culture here in America, here we're work, make that money, buy that iPhone, get that Benz, get that nice house, live the perfect Instagram life. And, we focus so much on the external that the internal kind of gets unrecognized. What we're truly wanting, what we're truly needing, because we're bombarded with constant messages, reinforcing, some potentially, in the school systems, it's standardized education, which is a joke. I was a teacher. I worked with students who have special needs, specifically children with autism and emotional behavioral disorder. And I did also work in the lower grades, K through 2, and just seeing how that system, I actually had to leave because I found it very, it's hard for me to say the word toxic, but because the teachers there working there, it's not necessarily, it's not the people that are working with the children, it's just the way that the system itself is created. And unfortunately, I found myself stressing children out that I felt it wasn't serving them. I felt it wasn't serving them towards their educational, their goals. And, we worked through things. I don't want it to sound like, there was tears, or it was more so watching it happen and the way that they were talked to. And if I wasn't there, you know what I mean? And wishing that things didn't have to be the way that they were implemented. And, even which way to go about fixing it. How would we even go about that? What sort of because it's not as if the knowledge and the statistics and the science isn't there. And it's not as if the parents are not in an uproar, and it's all there. We all know. So me, I wonder, what will it actually take? And, that is a separate, it's a separate conversation, but I do feel it's important because we are talking about healing our ancestral lineages. This is the next generation and what is going to come for the next generation afterwards, I guess technically speaking, you and I shouldn't have to theoretically worry about that because it doesn't touch us. But I do believe that people at a core level do want to see others succeed when they're, in a healthy place to do so.
Yeah, I think it's exactly as you're saying. Like it starts by becoming the example and letting that ripple out through every single one of the interactions, because that's how we learn. And some of the conversations I've had recently with other men who are working with men is that one of the things that has been absent from most people's lives is an example of empowered masculinity, what that actually looks like. But the same is true about empowered femininity, because really what we're talking about is a fully integrated human being. and what that looks like, how to behave in that way. And so we're taking information from all over the place, trying to figure out how it is we're supposed to behave in a way that actually brings us connection and fulfillment. And the only way for that to change is for there to be examples, and for those examples to actually ripple out through relationship. And one of the ways to do that as like an individual walking through the world is to see the authentic person that you're interacting with, but to respond to their programs. And I'll clarify what I mean by that. If somebody is getting angry or upset, having the recognition, like you were saying, that it's not personal, that it's a program that's getting activated, that it's an unprocessed wound. And so you respond to that wound as a support,
Absolutely.
As a fully integrated human being. It's like you respond to that wounded child that is there, not as like an elevated, I'm superior to you, but it's like, I actually really, really love you and care about you. So how can I support the healing of this unprocessed thing? Anger is coming up. That means there's a wound. What just happened? What activated them? And like developing this capacity of perception, where it can be as simple as being like, how can I support you right now? Asking that question to somebody who's angry. You'd be amazed at what happens. There's this one interaction I had with somebody who was like livid with me and was, from my experience, projecting a lot of his anger on me. And at a certain point, I just interrupted him and I asked him, how can I be a better friend? And he like stopped for like 3 seconds in stunned silence. And then he started coming up with answers of how I could be a better friend. And I'm like, okay. And that was like the end of that conversation.
That was it.
It's like he just wanted like connection and to feel like he was appreciated and supported, and that was it, So it's like, if we can see the real person, but then respond to the wounds that are coming up, in a supportive capacity, that's the example that people need.
Absolutely. I had a situation. Now mine was a little bit more tumultuous because I still was not at that level, but at the time I was able to at least recognize in the situation that the person was clearly upset by a situation that really sort of semi-involved me, but it wasn't, the anger was not with me. The anger was being displaced towards me because I was the smaller, more quieter, not gonna bite back. Whereas the other person was, it was a male figure that this person had attached to, was being manipulated by, and he identified this person as a brother. And to yell at this person was more hurtful than to yell at me. In the midst of his anger, I'm watching him, and I literally it was just an explosive, like from 0 to 60. I was like, this isn't with me, because I didn't do anything. And normally I would have found some way. Usually I've been in many situations where I'm like, oh, well, somehow it's always my fault, and but this time I had said, you know what, no, this isn't my fault. So I had to actually stop him and say, okay, no, that's fine, you're angry, but the only reason why you're angry right now is because the only reason why you're taking this out on me is because you know that I will accept it, and then we will recover. Basically an explosive, like I need to channel this rage out with someone. It's going to be more acceptable by you because you won't leave afterwards. Whereas if I do it with this other person, they might leave, or I might hurt them, and then our connection will be severely broken. Now, it was in this rage, though, actually, that I said, you know what, I'm going to leave. No, because I love you. You're angry. No, because I love you. And I actually walked outside. A few minutes later, I was approached with an apology, sincere tears, and actually it was a thank you for essentially saying, hey, this, look at what you're doing right now. You know, and he said, I'm sorry. I immediately went, and it was like, I was even asking myself why I was doing this as I was verbally yelling, you know what I mean? He didn't even understand why. And then was able to admit that he didn't understand why he does hurt the people closest to him. And it only makes sense because we tend to feel more comfortable expressing these angry emotions with people that we trust, you know. Whereas if I don't, you know, you have an how much harder is it to yell at someone you don't know? You know, because you don't know this person, you don't have any security, no foundation. Oh God, what's going to happen if I yell at this guy? We have no prior basis of experience, you know. But usually it's often, that's why they say that we tend to hurt the people that are closest to us and who have this garnered, you know, sense of security and trust.
And maybe this can be the last thing that we chat about. I got to get going pretty quick here, but I wanted to talk about that thing you just mentioned, because you're talking about boundaries now, which is the, you know, the article that you read, and it was the reason why you wanted to reach out to me in the first place.
That's so funny.
But boundaries is really the ability to manage inflow of energy, because I mean, we're all on our own personal journey as well. And there's certain standards of relating. Like if something is like a patterned way of disrespect or not behaving appropriately is like established, and a person is trying to like assert domination or manipulation or something that's inappropriate, you know, beyond just like a wound getting activated, but some sort of coercion or something that's out of integrity being directed towards us. It's our responsibility to maintain a certain standard of nobility. There's another word that's floating around, maybe it'll come in as I'm talking, but being able to maintain a certain dignity, maintain a certain standard of dignity as the prerequisite for an interaction actually compels another person to up-level their standard of behavior in response. You know? Because if they're allowed to just play out whatever kind of immature responses, you know, are playing out, and they don't have any intention or capacity for actually processing, and they're just looking to vent, you know, it's up to us to be able to maintain a standard of what is being directed towards us.
Absolutely.
So like I was saying in that article, there's 3 different stages of that. The first one is like almost like defensiveness, retaliatory response, which is our own nervous system getting activated. The second one is our ability to actually stand up and reclaim our own sense of self-worth, you know, and to fight for something valuable inside of us, you know. But after we actually have that established and we know without a doubt what our self-worth is in this particular relationship as it's unfolding, then there's nothing to defend anymore. And it's just a recognition of like, oh, this is the perpetuation of behavior that is self-defeating and destructive. And because of that, I will stop it from being directed here so that the exchange is over, you know, so that there is no self-defeating pattern that unfolds here. And then it becomes an act of service, which is an incredibly beautiful gift that you can give to somebody that they will perceive likely as time unfolds. Maybe not in the moment, but after, upon reflection, they're like, wow, you're actually right. I was like caught up in something that, you know, was really not healthy. So I'm sorry. And thank you for doing that. And then that actually deepens the connection. You know, that's how boundaries can actually reinforce healthier connection and ways of relating with each other that is important. You know, it's important to receive no's from time to time so that we can learn
Absolutely.
how to behave properly.
Absolutely. And I have throughout my life, I was a yes girl. You know what I mean? And now seeing when the no's, the changes, like you said, it's like allowing that experience from being the yes girl. Now I'm speaking and watching the changes that come forward from that in my relationships, and watching the changes that come through for the other person, where they actually come back and they say, thank you, you know, I wasn't aware. Or you see them move it, even if they don't necessarily pinpoint, but drop that subtle hint into, I shouldn't have been doing that. I'm gonna get back in my lane and respect you, you know. And they do, like you said, come back and try to meet you at that. They up their game. What was it you were saying? They up their level to meet you because they realize, like, oh gosh, I really can't go there. You know, I shouldn't go there. That was too far.
Mhm.
And yeah, no, absolutely. Saying the no's. And I mean, that's scientifically proven too. Statistically, you give too many yeses, you praise a child too much, it loses its validity.
Mm.
You're always saying yes, so you're doing such a great job. The word trophies that they hand out now, the participation, thank you for participating. It actually gives a really, it's like, who do I believe? I know, you know what I mean? It actually encourages that. So you really only want to give praises when they're deserved. You only want to give yeses when they're deserved. Otherwise, they're totally, you know, take advantage of the situation. I mean, that can really play out in so many different ways. But yes, our yeses and nos are so important. And if you find being a yes person, you need to try dropping a no sometimes when it's necessary. You should absolutely.
Yeah, totally. And being able to do that, like we were talking about before, in order to be able to give a no, then your self-worth can't be dependent on the perspective of other people, because you are threatening, you know, their approval of you by giving them a no immediately. That's what you're doing.
Yes.
And so to have the willingness and the capacity to do that, to stand up in the face of disapproval, is needed to be able to give a no. And so in order to be able to do that from that third stage of boundary setting, like I was describing, you can't actually get there unless you're doing your own work, your own self-work. And if you are giving a lot of no's without having done your own self-work, then you could be falling into this trap of, like, you know, superiority complex, or trying to, like, you know, validate or try to, like, you know, use your own victim mentality to change external environment, you know.
Yes.
Because the other side of the spectrum is also there. If you have done your own work, you have the discernment to be able to tell, like, when somebody is actually just needing some support and some presence, and, you know, to actually build connection through your capacity to hold space for somebody going through something, and when to stop something. You develop that discernment by doing your own personal work. If that isn't there, then you can, like, shut somebody down when they really need support, or you could allow something that it would really benefit everybody for you to just stop, you know?
Absolutely. And you have to be, again, be willing to go through the experience, whether you're going to succeed or fail, because usually if we're caught in this dynamic where we realize I've become too willing to say yes all the time because I feel either guilty or somehow responsible, or whatever that form comes up in, you know, to say that first no. Usually what happens is we create this foundation where we're like, oh shoot, but they know that I always say yes. And now the expectation is for me to say yes. For that first no to come out, You have to be really willing to see yourself through it, because it is very scary. I can say that from my own personal experience. The beast that I was talking about, that somehow like has like its own, I mean, it will start telling you, oh, well, they're not going to understand. Why were you saying it? You know, now you're going to have to go into an explanation. It's going to have to be this whole big thing. And I would find a million one ways from the fear center, probably irrational, you know, to say like, why is it so hard to just say no? You know, when probably they probably went to a million other people already and already said they have heard. It's not like they've never heard no before.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and I had to really come down into myself and realize, maybe I don't want to lose this person. Maybe it's stemming from a fear of abandonment. Maybe I don't want to be plastered or judged in a certain way, whatever, you know what I mean? Now I'm speaking relative, whatever that is.
So the question that I would have would be like, how did you feel after you asserted that boundary?
Oh, fantastic. Because
Right?
in my situation, you know, and I will say, you know what, at first I was met with resistance. That's the thing. At first I was met with resistance, and I was like, oh God, fuck, I really did it now. You know, like I followed through with my no. And now I'm like, oh my God, this is, you know, I guess it was just meant to be. And I had this defeatist, like, I guess we just can't be friends anymore. And I'm like,
It's all over now.
it's all over now because I said no.
Yeah.
And it was just like, no, the next day, it was like nothing ever happened. And I had allowed my little splinter to, you know, imagined it to be this gigantic nail. And
Mm-hmm.
it was nothing. And from there on, it was just a practice of, you know, hey, I'm using my discernment. I know I shouldn't do, you know what I mean? And really learning to trust myself, you know, rather than face that I had been coming into the situation with time and time again, my mask, you know what I mean? Finally, I said, living in that authenticity, you know what? The mask has not been helping, because every time I approach this situation, what kind of friendship do I really have if I truly feel uncomfortable all the time? Because I can't be myself. I can't say no, you know?
Yeah.
That
Yeah, definitely. And any type of healthy boundary setting has that quality to it. It's almost like an invigorating reclamation of something really.
yeah.
Know? It's like, yeah, that the way you described it was perfect. Where first there's like oh fuck, I messed up. I'm gonna be punished. Something bad's gonna happen. But then there's almost like this settling, and it's like, actually, you know what? That feels pretty good. Like, I deserve that, you know? And it's like, whoop, something that had been lost is like suddenly back inside of you again. That's how you know it's like a healthy boundary. It's the effect afterwards. It's the same with any type of genuine self-care. If you're engaged in self-care, genuine self-care always leaves you feeling replenished, rejuvenated, restored in some way. Whereas self-defeating activities leave you feeling depleted, empty, numb. Like you can use something like a movie as genuine self-care, but you can also use it as avoidance, you know, and the way that
Absolutely.
You can tell is how you feel afterwards. You know, you can use a book as an escapist thing, or you can use it as genuine self-care. It's the same with boundary setting. As soon as you develop that sensitivity, that awareness regarding your emotional somatic sensation, then you can start actually using your system to gauge appropriate response to different relational opportunities, you know, where it's
Absolutely.
like, if there's no risk involved and a person is actually opening up to be vulnerable with their incredible emotion, and you're actually quite rooted and grounded and nothing's being threatened, then it's like, okay, there's no need to actually establish a boundary here. But if they just keep going and going and going, you might start getting like tingles of uneasiness, or like something's not right here if I'm just allowing this to continue. And then that feeling will continue to grow. That's the call for like, okay, there's a behavior response that will support here. And you're tuning into the sensitivity that you've cultivated to actually activate that. And then afterwards, like if you can communicate it, it might not be a hard boundary. It could be, I'm noticing that you're falling into this pattern of just venting an experience right now. I'm curious as to whether or not this is actually helping you, or if there's a better way that we can process this experience. Like, is there something that you want to do that will make you feel better? You want to go on a walk? Do you want to like, and you can start offering suggestions, or just like bring dialogue to it to see what's going on, to like break the pattern and to see what unfolds. They might even just say, actually, you know what? You're right. I am venting. I think I'm actually complete right now. I don't need to talk about this anymore. And you're like, okay, great. Well, thank you for sharing. And then it's like, it's over. And then afterwards you're like, fine again. But if they're like, actually, yeah, you know what I need might be a walk, that could really help. They'd be like, okay, great, let's go do that. And you've found like some sort of like thread to follow based on your own emotional somatic response to the scenario. Whereas if, you know, you can feel something's wrong, it's like, oh fuck, hard boundary, this is not appropriate. We got to stop this to maintain integrity of relationship. You have to follow through on that, because if you don't, you're going to collapse. And you'll be able to tell at the end of the experience, you'll feel like less, you'll feel like, I don't know, attacked or beaten down in some way, or abused or disrespected. Whereas if the desire or the need to assert a boundary, you're aware of it and you follow through on it, there is that reclamation. There's immediate feedback that we get from our system when we start really feeling into it and following through on those things.
Yes.
As we are no longer bound by our fear responses, but we're recognizing the fear response and we're able to interpret it. It's a very different thing from just like reacting from your fear response and interpreting your fear response. It's like, oh, fear response, boundary, something's being crossed, and then actually propels you into action instead of actually causing you to withdraw. I really love talking with you, Hannah, but we've gone longer than I was planning.
I know. Yeah, no, and I have another meeting actually in about 20 minutes.
Okay.
So I think I'm gonna like decompress and then jump right into that.
Cool. Well, this is a great conversation. Sure. I love chatting with you.
Yeah, no, me too. Thank you so much for being so open, sharing everything. It was awesome.